During the days when Elohim raised up judges to lead his people out of idolatry and bondage, a brewing rebellion in the hearts of many has given Apollyon and his agents a momentary upper hand, plunging Israel into darkness and setting them on a path of destruction, one that the enemy hoped would eradicate the woman seed he so desperately feared. To the uninitiated, this battle seems hopeless, but Elohim is preparing his remnant faithful for a grueling, unseen battle where the victory is already theirs for the taking, if they stay on the path. The sky was peppered with frenzied sparrows fleeing from the thunderous battle cries on the ground below, piercing sounds of splintering shields, clashing swords, and shrieks of glorious victory and painful defeat were terrifying to most spectators, whether man or beast. But not to the young boy, cloaked behind a row of cedars, watching with amazement from a safe vantage point. Indeed, this was far more thrilling than babysitting sheep. Crouched low to the ground, he began waving his shepherd's rod, if it were a warrior's sword, mimicking with graceful choreography the movements of the soldiers on the battlefield. His eyebrows arched with nostrils flared as he fought against imaginary Moabite invaders, while his vastly outnumbered countrymen dispatched the real ones with relative ease. How should one chase 1,000, and two put 10,000 to flight, except their rock had given them over, and Yahweh had delivered them up? Yes, Adonai was with Israel today, as he always was when his people were faithful, and in many cases, even when they weren't. The young shepherd, surrounded by multiple opponents in his mind, tap danced to evade each would-be assaulter, his big sister Zeruiah's training mantras echoing in his mind. Eyes up, aim small, miss small. Let your feet see for themselves. Lose your balance, lose your life. As the lad continued watching the battle with awe, he noticed one soldier who was more distinguished than the other Israelite men of war. Not only did he tower over every other individual on the field, he fought with a dominance unlike any other that seemed to mesmerize his opponents and give him an even greater advantage than his intimidating size already granted him. There wasn't a single Moabite on the field that was even close to a match for him, and not for 1 second did the man appear to be in the slightest danger of being touched, far less bested. The young boy began emulating the valiant warrior's moves, trying to mirror his infectious confidence, his effortless ease of movement, his almost precognitive anticipation of every enemy attack, as if everyone were moving in slow motion, and he was going full speed. Just then, a fiery Israelite soldier who couldn't have been much older than the onlooker himself stumbled and fell wounded, barely a stone's throw away from the same unstoppable man. In the blink of an eye, the man transformed from an elegant dancer toying with the enemy to a frenzied madman whose new goal was to protect the fallen lad at any cost. He cut down half a dozen Moabites without breaking stride and tumbled in front of the young soldier on the ground, pulling him up with one hand while fighting off two attackers with the sword in his other. His face no longer displayed the cool confidence that had radiated from him before. His features were now marred with a frantic fear for his comrade's life, and like a cornered mother bear protecting her cubs, the man was ready to fight the entire horde of Moab to save the wounded lad. Getting a good look at the warrior's face, he realized with a start that it was none other than the king himself. He knew very little about Saul, but what little he had heard about royalty from the other nations painted a picture in his mind that a king would far more likely to be lounging in his lavish palace while his army men fought and died for him, instead of placing his own life in danger on the battlefield. Slightly triggered, the lad's already growing admiration for Saul kicked up several notches as he witnessed a young wounded soldier experience something he had always dreamed of experiencing with his own father, but never did. to be passionately cherished and defended at all costs from the world around him. As a father has compassion on his children, so Yahweh has compassion on those who fear him. He had just composed those song lyrics less than a couple weeks ago, purely poetry, for he had hardly received compassion or any deeply loving emotion from his father. But he imagined that's how an earthly father should be, because it was precisely how his heavenly father was. And in just a few minutes of battle, he had seen Saul exhibit this trait and immediately felt a connection to him, wondering if he was the same kind of loving father he had shown himself to be in defense of the fallen youth. The king had slung the boy soldier on his back and continued fighting even more feverishly than before, while the spectating lad, no longer pretending to be a fighter in Israel's army, watched with rapt attention, hoping and praying that both Saul and the half-conscious young soldier he was shielding with his own body would survive the encounter. "Go home." The words were barely a whisper in his mind. He knew the voice, but his muscles remained frozen as he continued to watch the skirmish, his worried eyes fixated on the king, his teeth clenched, his sweaty palms clasped in hopeless desperation, powerless to impact the outcome of the battle before him. "Go home, now!" Snapping out of his temporary paralysis, he sprung into obedient action, knowing that whenever Adonai spoke, it was not to be taken lightly. Each time he had to repeat himself, his voice not only got more insistent, but eventually he'd use other means of getting his message across. Methods that were not always as comfortable as him simply being compliant the first time. As he broke into a sprint through the forest to the clearing where began the long, rocky path towards Bethlehem, he tried to push aside the thoughts of dread that suddenly invaded his mind. What trouble awaited him? Did some health crisis befall his elderly parents? Did an enemy brigade manage to slip past Paul's vanguard and attack his home? Did Zeruiah find out that he had again, without permission, left his sheep in the care of one of the servants to seek his own adventures? Yes, that was probably it. It had made the adrenaline course even faster through his nimble body. He made it to the path entrance and switched from purely running and dodging foliage to taking one large leap after another, as the rocks made it difficult to maintain a high foot speed. And the less contact his feet made with the shifty, uneven stones, the faster he could close the distance. It had to be Zeruiah. She was supposed to be traveling to Beersheba this morning, which is why he had decided to sneak away today. But perhaps something came up at home that forced her to postpone the trip. Truth be told, he'd much rather confront a garrison of Ammonites alone than face an angry Zeruiah. His sister, a formidable warrior in her own right, was old enough to be his mother and loved and protected him with a fierce passion he never truly felt from his actual parents. But she also had a hot temper and was dangerously unpredictable when she got angry. Winded, he quickened his pace even more, rounding a corner and reaching the smoother part of the path, where the large rocks became smaller stones that made maneuvering much easier. By now he had been going full speed for at least half an hour, his overworked heart violently protesting such vile, reckless treatment of his body. "I will run the ways of your commandments, when you shall enlarge my heart," he whispered along with a silent prayer to Adonai for forgiveness for abandoning his responsibilities in the first place. Finally, he'd arrived at the edge of his pasture and collapsed on the lush grass, his lungs incapable of taking in such precious air fast enough. Whatever trouble he was in, he needed to be in a much more restful state to face it. But two sounds in his ears quickly told him there was no rest to be had. Not now. "Master!" Racing frantically toward him was Fura, the servant he had left in charge of the sheep. The next sound told him everything he needed to know about the situation before Fura had a chance to speak further. It started as a low, guttural growl that sent chills reverberating up and down his spine. The sharp, rhythmic staccato putting the fear of Yahweh into every man and beast within earshot. Lions were not uncommon in Judah, and the local shepherds had often swapped war stories of their encounters with them. But virtually all of those tales, at least the ones that were true, ended disastrously with ghastly injuries and loss of life to sheep and herdsmen alike. They rarely targeted humans for food, when less intimidating options were accessible. Like all predators, they sought the weakest and most readily available, yet they would not hesitate to attack anyone that dared stand between them and a meal. Full of terror, the servant bent over his young master, unaware of what trouble had befallen him, and doubtful that he, even in his normal state of youthful, energetic optimism, could do anything to remedy the situation. Fura knew what the lad was probably thinking. This was entirely his fault, and as a trusted servant who had been responsible for the flock on numerous occasions, he should have been better prepared. He had let the sheep wander completely out of position, grazing near the top of the hill where an approaching foe could emerge with little advance warning. If he had kept them properly residing in the valley where there was still abundant pasturage for the flock, there would have been such ample time for him to see an approaching threat that most animal predators wouldn't even attempt an attack in that scenario. The average herdsman in this predicament would simply play the numbers and let the lion walk off with one of the sheep. It would be pointless to get severely wounded or lose one's life when the beast was not going to be denied anyway. But playing the numbers was not an option for the shepherd boy, because he genuinely loved and felt personally responsible for every single one of his sheep. And second, he had an advantage that most didn't: an unwavering faith in the Almighty, whose limitless love and power he had intimately grown to know during his long, solitary sessions caring for the flock. Even when he had not been faithful to his entrusted tasks, Adonai had nonetheless alerted him to the danger and given him the strength to arrive just in time. This meant that he had not only forgiven his impropriety, but also would use him to do the impossible and bring more glory to his name if he put his faith into action. Without a word of response to his servant, the boy leaped to his feet with renewed strength and vigor and raced towards the interloper with a battle cry on his lips, pouncing on the lion as if he were the predator swooping on his prey. The lion had just snatched one of the lambs, but, given the suddenly attacking human, he had not killed her, but rather held her in his mouth by the scruff of her neck, anxious to run off to a safe place where he could feast in quiet solitude. But the young shepherd was not going to allow that, especially after witnessing the selfless act of compassion King Saul had displayed in defense of his fallen soldier. Launching himself at the fleeing beast, he was able to grab the lion's mane for leverage and swing his shepherd's staff around his neck to apply a chokehold. The lion flailed violently, fighting in vain to shake the boy off his back, trying desperately to swipe him with his deadly claws to no avail. The boy held on with unmatched determination, pulling the rod with all his might to constrict the lion's throat and force him to loosen his jaws that gripped the eel's scruff. Fura, who was watching from a safe distance, sprang forward without hesitation as he saw the lamb slowly slipping free. "Throw it to me, master!" The lad nodded tersely, took a deep breath, then whispered a quick prayer, knowing that since he only had two hands, he'd have to relinquish his advantage and release his stranglehold on the lion to be able to grasp the sheep. In an instant, he whirled to the ground and swung his rod at the beast's head, stunning him for a precious moment that allowed him to pull the released lamb towards his body. Rolling on his side, the lion grunted noisily as his free throat took in full gasps of air, while Fura swooped close to snag the ewe from the arms of the shepherd, who rolled away from the feline and catapulted to his feet. He beamed a smile of satisfaction as he saw his servant sprinting to safety with the terrified ewe cradled in his arms, then turned to make sure his foe would stay down. Suddenly, he hit the ground with a thud as the beast landed a blow to the boy's skull with his swinging paw. The lion pressed his advantage and launched his razor claws, scoring a nasty wound on his forearm that oozed hot, sticky blood and forcing a shriek from his lungs. writhing in pain. The boy blinked his teary eyes in time to the lion's jaws lunging for the kill shot. Adonai, save me! Rebellion was written and produced by Darien Claxton. Framework consulting by Gamal Alexander. Artwork by Gustavo Diaz. Music by Dream Cave. Featuring the voices of Vladimir Louissant, Naomi Claxton, and Bradley Tramel.
This battle is not fought with the physical or the carnal. Are you prepared for this type of warfare? You must be tooled up. Put on that helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness. Have the shield of faith ready. Only through power and might of Elohim can we succeed to build his kingdom and wreak havoc on the enemy. Have you sharpened your sword? Have you spent time in your word? Have you prayed every day without ceasing? Have you repented to seal open doors that have given Apollyon an advantage in his assault on you and your family? Rejoice, brothers and sisters, for our victory is in the Father. Know truly that the battle has already been won. Ask for his spirit on a constant basis. Only then will you be able to discern the avenues that the devil employs to take you out. Our souls are on the line. The enemy is strong, but the battle is not given to the strong nor to the swift, but to the one who endures until the end. It is serious, brothers and sisters. No one turns from this fight. Everyone must face it. You either fight for Elohim or you rot with Apollyon. Whether you do it with conviction or in ignorance, you will either be casualty or victor. Which path do you choose?